This is episode 8 of the LatinNews Podcast. I'm Richard McCall, your host here in Bogota, Colombia. My very special guest this week is Ana Milagros Parra. She's a political scientist and consultant based in Caracas, Venezuela. And yes, we're going to be discussing the presidency, the regime of Nicolas Maduro, what's going on in Venezuela at the moment. Unfortunately, the news has slipped away from the front pages, but Venezuela is very much an item that needs to be discussed. So welcome so much on the LatinNews Podcast, Ana Milagros.
Thank you so much, Richard, for the invitation. I'm so excited to talk about the country.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure because, I mean, we've got you there in Caracas. So you are on the ground, you are seeing and witnessing what's going on. I think the place where we need to start, let's start looking ahead and then we'll sort of come backwards. And I want to start with saying 2024, there are presidential elections, and already the government in power, Nicolas Maduro, that's president, is looking at creating what is known as a mega election, something that's incredibly illegal, I believe.
Yeah, that's not legal because we should wait until December 2024 to have the presidential elections. But we have to remind everyone that even though the government is creating this narrative and propaganda that Venezuela is okay and Venezuela it's not a dictatorship, we live under a dictatorship, and they manipulate all the laws in the country for to their favor and the political agenda, no? So they want to make the presidential elections with the major election and the regional elections for them to make them easier. They don't want to make fair elections because they know they're going to lose, you know? And then we have the primary election, de las primarias, that it's an election that is from the opposition. I mean, the state is not involved in that. The opposition tried to involve the CNE, that is this power, that is the electoral power, but they couldn't make it because the Senate is not giving them the freedom and to choose the candidates. So we have to know we live under a dictatorship that doesn't want to make free elections, and they don't want to allow a really strong opposition person or a candidate to go to the presidential elections. We have Maria Corina Machado, that's at the front runner. We can call her like that. And he is now unable to participate in any public thing because they put it like this sentence in the Tribunal Suprema Justicia. So now it's illegal for her to go to an election, no? So they want to create an opposition that is comfortable for them and it's not like a threat for them staying in power. So that in mind, no, Venezuela is not a democracy. Venezuela is not fixed because we have this propaganda narrative that say Venezuela se arregló, Venezuela it's okay. It's not like that. We still live in a country, we don't have like these public services. I mean, I don't have running water, no, I don't know, half of my week. And we still have this emergencia humanitaria compleja. I mean, people are dying, people are struggling to have fair wages for them to live and salaries. So Venezuela is the same that you read in the newspapers maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago when Juan Guaidó was popular. Mm-hmm. And when you read this migration crisis, and I mean, most of the people here in the country are not here and we are really used to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's now a reality. That you know that a friend that your family is divided because they're outside of the country and you can't even see them. So that's what the government did to us, and they still keep doing it. Even though we have the opposition, we have some things about the international community. We have the International Criminal Court coming here and saying, yeah, this government violates human rights and all that stuff. But we have this political scenario when they are trying to say and project to international community that we are okay and we are doing fair elections, and that's not true.
Yeah, and I did see also that the CNE was replaced recently, and President Maduro's wife is now on the committee creating a new one. I mean, this doesn't paint a favorable picture for anyone in any opposition at all.
Yeah, it's like saying, okay, we are gonna create this power, the Senate, the Consejo Nacional Electoral, that regulates legally all the elections in theory. And we have, before that, the new CNN, we have, I mean, it wasn't the best, but we have two opposition rectors inside that. But it wasn't comfortable enough for them. They wanted a CNN that it was under their power, under their control. So the presidential elections they don't become a threat for them in power, you know? So they changed it. They didn't ask the people, they didn't respect the laws, and they want to put a lot of Chavistas or Maduristas. I don't like to call Chavistas, but we are not under Chavez anymore. But people from the National Party and the government party inside the CNN to control everyone. So that's like the major red flag, that we are not gonna have fair elections. And they did that because las primarias, the opposition, they started to ask the CNN to assist them in their elections. There were a lot of discussions inside the opposition whether or not to use the CNN, because they have this side of the opposition saying, why are you going to ask our perpetrators or the government to go and really being involved in an election that is only for the opposition? And the other one was saying, okay, but we're going to have to use the CNN to the presidential elections too. But at the end, the government did what they did to do best, you know, that they changed the power for their, they changed it to keep going with their political agenda and not allow the opposition to have fair elections and to really make them difficult to choose a candidate. And the most popular candidates are now illegal. I mean, it's illegal for them to go to a presidential elections. That's totally illegal. I mean, that's not legal, but they keep doing it. So we're not even, I mean, I'm still thinking if we're going to have the primary elections, and I don't think the government is going to allow that. And it's really, I mean, it's really hard for us being here trying to really organize and go and choose a candidate to represent us in a presidential election that is not going to be fair. And then the government is saying, okay, I'm going to choose the candidate and you're not going to be able to do it. So I'm going to put it more difficult for you to choose it and to really create a strong opposition for me in the 2024.
And a mega election, as we mentioned at the very beginning, would be the presidential election and then all state elections at the same time.
Yeah, with mayors and governors.
And so they would be able to put all of their, I would say, their finances together and basically push all the Maduristas into power.
Yeah, and at the same time, they're doing it because it's going to be more difficult for the opposition to organize itself and really go to a big election, because we have to be really focused on the fact that the government of Nicolás Maduro they implement this strategy to divide the opposition and to make them basically incompetent to really be opposition. I mean, we are, like I said, we are a dictatorship that violates human rights, and we don't have freedom of speech, and everyone that is real opposition, because we have another opposition that is created by the government, but the real opposition, they're really scared because everything that they do can be repercussions, legal repercussions, or even end up in jail.
So that, I mean, that I see that as very difficult indeed, because of course, if they don't give, legitimacy to the opposition, and they don't allow for the opposition to have a coherent platform and network, that therefore they can completely stifle and smother them in 2024. So, I mean, this doesn't look good. It doesn't look good at all. I mean, we can't say very many positive things at all. I do need to it seems to me, looking at this from here in Colombia, that President Maduro feels perhaps he feels less pressured right now to make
Yeah.
any concessions to the opposition and to appease the international community, since there's a bit of a, there's been a left swing in the region. We've got Lula in Brazil, we've got Boric, who obviously spoke out against human rights abuses, which was, kind of incredible. But Boric in Chile, got Petro here in Colombia. So Maduro's feeling comfortable. Sanctions have been kind of lightly relaxed by the Biden administration in the United States. Has this given Maduro a real sense of security then?
I don't know if it's security, because when you are in an authoritarian regime, the president, he's always thinking about the threats in his inner cycle. But yeah, if we put it like you said, the international community right now is not that hard on him like it was before. Like we was Juan Guaidó, we have these right-wing presidents that they were really vocal against Nicolas Maduro, against his regime, and against the human rights abuses. Right now, we have this swing to the left, and a lot of presidents in the region are comfortable with the Maduro presence and the Maduro in the presidency, and they're trying like to wash his face, saying, okay, he's not a dictator. He's just a bad president. Oh, Venezuela is not a dictatorship. It's just a bad democracy. That's something that Lula said. And even Petro came here and he stretched Maduro's hand. And I mean, he's like forgetting that he's accused of crimes against humanity for the International Criminal Court. And that's not something we can forget. And if you come here to Venezuela, you can see, okay, some businesses, maybe people are more in the street, but that doesn't mean that we have freedom or we have we're in a democratic country when we can say we have rights, So yeah, the international community is not that aggressive with Maduro, and he feels more comfortable in this international dynamic, because the opposition is not strong enough. And I mean, we have another thing in the agenda, that is the Russia and Ukraine war.
Yeah.
When that happened, Venezuela is not like the most relevant topic, because we have a war in that side, a war that was started for a Maduro ally, that is Russia. I mean, Putin and Maduro are like basically best friends or really good friends. So yeah, we have another thing in the agenda. It is not Venezuela, but that doesn't mean we're not bad and we're not. And Maduro is still, I mean, it's a worse dictatorship than it was before, because he feels more in freedom or more comfortable doing what he does, because he doesn't have the eyes of the world above him. So that's really, I mean, it's dangerous for us. And I worry a lot, because myself, like a Venezuelan, a consultant, a political analyst, that I'm always reading about the news, it's really hard to see in a couple of years that all the international community, most in the region, basically forgot about Venezuelans and or they want to forget that Venezuela is not a democracy and it's really a threat to all the region. A security threat, is a threat for all the political systems around the region, because you have a dictatorship that is being comfortable with all the governments and most of the presidents in the region. I mean, if I were a Colombian, I will be really worried that he's totally okay with being okay with Maduro. I mean, you have to see, and that's something that's happening, because Petro is like being like, he's not that comfortable being around Maduro anymore. Basically, with this inhabilitación, I don't know how to say that in English. When you stop a candidate for running for public
office.
For public office, and Petro's put like some tweets saying, okay, no one should be target of that, and but it's not frontal. It's not something I'm going against Maduro. It's just really passive with that, but I can see Petro like being really friendly with Maduro, and he's not that close to him, because is costing him some popularity in Colombia. But just because of that, it's not like he's not vibing with Maduro. It's not his friend. It's just because he's having these political costs inside his country.
And then, of course, he can, I mean, let's not go too much into this, but of course, then he can point to those tweets and say, but listen, I've reprimanded, as you say, passively, President Maduro for this. You mentioned Juan Guaidó, the interim president, the interim government. This is something of the past now. What is going on with Juan Guaidó right now?
Well,
we had all of those images of him on the bridge and everything.
Yeah, we don't talk about him. I mean, he was like this stage or this like pass in the opposition where we had all our hopes in him because we really could see like the strongest strategy and this coalition, international community, and the opposition to really overthrow the government. But I don't think the strategy was effective enough. We can see we still have Maduro in power, but it was a really good couple of years when the government of Nicolás Maduro really felt the pressure of the international community and of the people here in Venezuela. And he realized that he realized he can have free and fair elections because he was going to lose. And then Guaidó like loses his momentum. I mean, if you are an interim president and you have the legal legitimacy and all that stuff, but Maduro has the real power. I mean, he had this capacity of doing things inside the country. And then the pandemic hit, and it was a blessing for all dictatorships in the world. It was a blessing for Maduro because he used the pandemic like an excuse to really control all the people and control the country. And we forgot about Guaidó because he didn't have real power. I mean, you had this tragedy, you had this support for President Trump at that time. We have this maximum pressure strategy with the sanctions. And it was a moment when we had our hopes in that tragedy, but now we can say it wasn't like a really good tragedy. It wasn't a good one because we still have Maduro in power. But Guaidó, Guaidó, we don't talk about him anymore. A lot of people are disappointed of Guaidó, of the party, of the position in general, because they didn't do what they promised people they will achieve, But I mean, I'm not mad with Guaidó. I mean, I understand that all the pressure and the things that he promised to do were impossible in that time. So it was good for him to do what he did, but we are in another phase of the political conflict. I mean, the interim government is dissolved. The Asamblea Nacional, the National Assembly of 2015, was the one that gave the legal legitimacy to Juan Guaidó to be interim president, is extinct. I mean, it's still existing, but we don't talk about it because they're not a relevant actor in the political system right now, in the political game. We are in another thing. The opposition with las primarias, this election to choose a candidate. It's more than a candidate because we're not talking just about election. We're talking about a representative inside the opposition that can create a strategy and apply the strategy to maybe guide us to transition to democracy. But we are in a really tough process because we're just alienating the different actors and seeing what is going on, because the government is changing too inside them. It's changing. A couple months ago, we had this corruption scandal in PDVSA, the oil company, when Tarek Al-Aissami was the oil minister. It was someone really close to Maduro, really close to the inner circle of power. We haven't heard from him since the corruption scandal, and we know there's been this purge inside the government, picking people that is in corruption schemes and going and putting them in jail, simulating that they are against corruption, something that we don't believe. Something happened inside the government. They are organizing themselves in different things, and that's why they changed the CNN. They changed different people from different ministers So we are in a different place, in a different phase of the political system and the political agenda. So it's not easy for the opposition. And I think the government feels more safe that no one is going to say anything. Because there's another thing. Venezuela is a problem for the democracies around the world because they were so vocal against Maduro a couple of years ago. And a lot of them are waiting for 2024 elections to say, okay, Maduro won an election, I can forget about Venezuela now. You know, like, okay, he won an election, I can forget about Venezuela now, and now that's their problem. And I think it's not fair, but I know that, I mean, any country, I mean, no country in the world has this I mean, they don't have to democratize another country. They don't want to, they don't have to give democracy to another country. We have to do it ourselves, but with their help. And with an opposition that is really undermined, an opposition that is scared, a position that is really divided, is hard, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yes, I mean, that as you say, that glimmer of hope, you don't think it's impossible. There was that hope under Juan Guaidó, but again, the regime has stacked everything against an opposition. It's all in the regime's favor towards this dictatorship. And it seems to me like this purge in the government or within, the halls of power, it's a reshuffling to concentrate power and strength, authority, but also to be able to say the right things to the population. Look at this, we are against corruption, look at us. But of course the whole, top to bottom, bottom to top is corrupt, and we know this. And that moves me quite nicely, is that, the President Maduro came out the other day and he makes statements. Obviously it's very populist and so on. He made a statement the other day against illegal mining and in favor of the environment. And he said, we need to get rid of this right now. We need to destroy it all. But it seems to me that this has been going on for as long as we can remember. We know from reports in the region that much of the illegal mining taking place is controlled or supported by illegal Colombian groups, such as the Ejército Liberación Nacional, the National Liberation Army. That's the longest running guerrilla group from Colombia now. And it just seems to me that this has more to do with Gustavo Petro in Colombia than Maduro himself. What can you tell us about this whole swathe of illegal mining and also Maduro speaking out against it, 10 days ago or so?
Yeah, that is that you just mentioned the open secret here in Venezuela, that we know about it, but we don't talk about it because it's a really dangerous topic to us for address, because it's like a really bad thing they're doing. There are a lot of things involved in the arco minero, in the illegal mining, and we have human trafficking. We have narco trafficking. We have a lot of things going on here, illegal things, and we don't talk about that enough because it's really dangerous. I mean, you don't hear that in radios. I mean, we don't have free speech. We don't have radios that we can talk about those things. But even in the internet, it's something we address it in a really secure way, because it could be something dangerous for us to talk about. So you talk about the arco minero, and we talk about illegal mining. That's something really normal that is happening in Amazonas and all the regions, the border with Colombia. I don't think it has more to do with Petro than with Maduro, because this thing happened before Petro, and they were happening before Petro. But why? Because the National Liberation Army, that's what I say in English, LN, it's using Venezuela for like a refuge for them, and with the welcome of the government. I mean, they're okay with them being here, and they even have this agreement with the armed forces in Venezuela to do the narco trafficking, human trafficking, and the illegal mining for them to have money. And that's something that the government allows to do, because why when you have an authoritarian regime, what they have to do is give these incentives, economic incentive, power incentives for them to keep them in power and to support the government. So, I mean, the National Liberation Army is here since, I mean, not National Liberation Army, but the guerrillas are have been here in Venezuela since the 80s. But in that time, the governments of that time, they weren't okay with that. They were really hostile against them, and they even allowed the Colombian armed forces to follow these guerrillas and to really take care of them. When Hugo Chavez came to power, they have this ideological campaignership or ideological things that make them to agree with Chavez, and Chavez were okay with them, and they just welcome the guerrillas in our territory. But something happened between Chavez and Maduro is that Venezuela was evolving in a criminal state. And that's something we have to talk about it, because we have an autocracy in a way, I mean, a dictatorship. We are talking just about politics. And when you talk about the state capacity and how we can address the state is a criminal state. Why is a criminal state? Because we have government people that is in public office being in this symbiotic relationship with armed groups and illegal groups inside the country, and allowing them to control parts of the country and the territory. I mean, if you go to El Zulia, that it's in the Catatumbo, is really in the border of Colombia. That's where I'm from. I'm from Maracaibo, from Zulia, so I know about that. You have these territories that are totally controlled totally controlled for the National Liberation Army. I mean, people look for this armed group for protection and for food and security because the state is not present. So you have to think about this Venezuelan state as a state that the government is not fully control of their territory, because they give the territory control to armed groups. So certain fact, I mean, in this couple of years, I mean, in the recent years, something has been happening because certain factions have become like the target of continuous offensive by Venezuelan high security forces. So we have like these shootings, assassinations, landmines, kidnappings, disappearance. I mean, a lot of things are happening to Venezuelan people, and the armed forces are behind that because they are struggling with the guerrillas. But in the, like, if we talk like in general, the guerrillas are living rent-free here in Venezuela, doing their illegal things, basically drug trafficking. That's the most important thing. They control this the production of cocaine. They have this territory, a big territory where they produce the cocaine, and they how can I say, las transportan?
They transport it.
they transport it like in this all over the country and to Mexico and all that stuff. So we're basically living in a criminal state with we can say a narco state too, because they're welcomed by the security forces, and Maduro knows that's happening. Maduro knows that a lot of the territory in Apure and maybe Táchira, Amazonas, Bolivar, and El Zulia, I mean, that's all the border of Venezuela that is in the Amazonas and with Colombia and Brazil. The control of that territory is with the LNN, no? For decades, Colombia rebels have taken advantage of that border of Venezuela and Colombia. I mean, it's not new that the guerrillas are here in Venezuela. It's not something new, but now it's worse, and it's a threat to the security of the region, because Maduro is totally okay with it. You know, it's totally okay with the guerrilla being here. They're welcome here. They're protected by the government, and they even have this relationship where they both work together. Even though something that I really want to talk about is that we can even talk about Colombian guerrillas, because now the guerrilla is formed with Venezuelans and Colombians. Now it's a bipartisan, or by, you have two nationalities, because they have been recruiting people from Venezuela from, I don't know, 12 years old, 15 years old, really young boys, to be in the guerrillas, because the state doesn't, the state is not following what they're supposed to do, like protect its people, and just the control is in the guerrillas. And that's really it's really dangerous for us. It's really dangerous for the region because we have this state that is not democratic, and they welcome and they're totally okay with illegal things happening in the country.
Yeah, this is one of the big debates we have here, is how, you create a ceasefire with the ELN, the National Liberation Army, within Colombia, but it's, as you say, it's now a multinational organization. It spreads all the way across Venezuela, and of course it's expanded its numbers with Venezuelan youth and so on. And I think you touch on that issue about the state not looking out for itself, and you also mentioned these groups involved in human trafficking. And I think this is a good moment to talk about the mass migrant exodus from Venezuela. I was up in the Darien a year ago, and a lot of the people I saw were Venezuelan, and we obviously talk about the Darien Gap, and there's been a lot of imagery, but this has been going on now for a while. I'd like to ask you there in Caracas, what do you see on the ground in the city as the impact of losing so many millions of countrymen?
Yeah, the mass exodus here in Venezuela is bigger than Ukrainian people. I mean, it's the only country that had so many people leave the country that it's not in war. I mean, we are in, so many people have left the country running from the human rights abuses, running from the low quality of life, and we are not in war. If we put like the Syrians, the Ukrainians, and all the people that have this max exodus, that 4 million, 5 million people, they are in war. And we are not in war. And I mean, you can see like this comparative thing. But yeah, something that it feels here in Venezuela is that we got used to it, because the first wave of migration was maybe in 2014 and then in 2017, and it was really hard because you can see, I mean, you saw how your friends, your family, your co-workers, they were just leaving the country, and you have to get used to have a party when you just have to say bye to them, and to live in a house when you don't have your mother, because I mean your mother went to Colombia to work, or they were running from the country on feet. I mean, there were people that were walking to another countries because they don't have the passport, because that's another thing. We don't have this right to identification, a right for have our passport of, and our identification is not happening really well here in Venezuela. I mean, it's really hard to have a passport, but that's another thing. When you hear in Venezuela right now, 2023, it's all reality. It's something that's always happening. A friend that is leaving the country, but that's talking about this middle class that maybe is not that strong here in Venezuela. But when you see the low classes, or the people that are really suffering the humanitarian crisis, those people are always thinking about running and escaping the country. I mean, we can say that this major maximum exodus is going to stop anytime soon, because the conditions inside the country are the same or even worse than before. Maybe you can see it, maybe the propaganda or the media is not reporting it, but when you start researching about Venezuela, you see they were in the same spot. If we talk about human rights abuses, we talk about quality of life and all that stuff. It's really hard living in, and this time Venezuela is much more expensive than another country in Latin America. I mean, I visited Colombia in March, and I was really upset because I couldn't believe how cheaper it is. If you compare to Venezuela, and compared to Caracas is really expensive. Right. It's really expensive, so it's really hard for people to live here. And that's, I mean, coming back from where your question, it's our reality. But a couple of weeks ago, I did this episode in my podcast. My podcast is called Ameria's Podcast, where we talk about Venezuela in Spanish, but with another. I mean, it's not like just reporting it. We talk with people, and we try to make it more fun to watch, because a lot of people, the most of Venezuelan, they're not interested in politics. They're tired of it, and they're just focusing on surviving. So that's what our objective. But we talk about the migration crisis and the Darien Gap, and the last numbers we have, the last number we have in the Darien Gap, they have increased the number of the Venezuelans using it to escape. You know, so the first thing when we hear about the Darien Gap was, I don't know, maybe a year ago, when everyone was really focused on what's happening, because it was really, I mean, it's not something you want to talk about because it's really, really crude and dangerous. And then when we check the numbers again a year later, it was a lot more people crossing the Darien Gap, and a lot of them were Venezuelans. And we don't even know how many of them were crossing the Darien Gap, because we don't have like these official numbers of people going and crossing it. I mean, we have Colombian authorities and we have Panamanian, is that what I can say? Yeah, Panamanian authorities, but we don't know how many people are really crossing it, or people that are dying in crossing it, children's, violent people, violent groups that assault people that are crossing it. But yeah, it's our reality. I mean, people live in the country is our reality. We are sadly really just settled down to have and to have like your family divided, and knowing that you're not gonna see maybe your siblings, your family for many years, because most of them are not able to leave the country they went to. I mean, the United States, most of them are there and they can live in the United States, and we can enter the United States because it's really hard for us to have a visa or something like that. So that's the gross, I mean, migration crisis in Venezuela that's still happening. Something that I want to really say is that that's something that is affecting other countries in the region. And I think those presidents and those governments can't ignore it, because there are a lot of Venezuelans going to their country, and they're going to keep going to their countries, and they are going to keep leaving Venezuela, because the only thing that's going to stop is with a change of government and having a democratic government in power with Maduro, or with something, or with someone inside the partido, I mean the official party. Is gonna perpetuate all the circumstances and all the situation that we're living here in Venezuela.
It will be a continuation of this, let's say, 21st century socialism brain drain that has taken place in Venezuela. Well, Ana Milagros, it has been a fascinating discussing what is obviously a terrible situation that is being experienced in Venezuela right now. And of course, we're talking to you there in Caracas. You're seeing it with your own eyes. You have your podcast in Spanish, A Medias. Obviously, people can subscribe everywhere, as they can to this one, the LatinNews Podcast. But we'd ask you, please keep reporting, but please stay safe. You know, it's a dictatorship, it's authoritarian. You need to be very careful about what you say. And therefore, we are immensely grateful that you are sharing this information with us here on the LatinNews Podcast. So thank you again, Ana Milagros Parra, political scientist and consultant based in Caracas.
Thank you so much, Richard. I mean, I really love this space, because usually I can talk about these things in Spanish because, you know, censorship, but I want to thank you for this space, for this opportunity to talk about my country. So anytime you need something, I'm here.
Thank you again. So we've been speaking to Ana Milagros Parra, political scientist and consultant, host of the A Medias podcast in Caracas, Venezuela. This has been episode 8 of the LatinNews Podcast. I've been your host, Richard McCall. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.